SOS! They're taking us! I hope that this is not just a cry for help, but that we can alert everyone who's going through this abduction process. Many abductees are placed under a hypnosis process, a type of memory suspension, so that there is no memory of these attacks when people are taken from their homes after the experiments and manipulations.
I was almost without strength to maintain that mental struggle when the Gray touched my head, and for a moment accessed one of my abduction memories from when I was 5 years old, which marked my life for a long time by fear and panic. This was a memory that I carried, and that in some moments of my life returned to haunt me. When I was 5 years old, these beings took me and started to manipulate me. I remember that I cried for fear of them, and they couldn't keep me still. They couldn't put me on suspension by mind control. It felt like there was something in me that stopped them from leaving me paralyzed. At the moment they were going to mess with my brain and try to insert a metallic wire through my left ear, I had the sensation of something burning me, and I moved my head hard to the side, and at that moment, I heard as if something had exploded, and my ear started to bleed. It pierced my eardrum, and a very loud echo resounded inside me. I felt something warm running down my neck, then I saw it was blood, and I had my first panic disorder process. I was a child, and feeling that blood coming out of my ear, I cried a lot and thought I was going to die. It was distressing. Even in the midst of despair and trying to get out of there, these beings didn't stop touching me, and they put something behind my left ear. Of course, over the years, I realized that they put a chip in me, and that it remains active to this day. It was from this ear that I lost my hearing during this abduction, and through that same ear I feel this high frequency, like a thin whistle, alerting me when an intervention is going to occur. What it seems to me is that, by emitting a kind of sound wave, the signal that returns shows where the abductees are, and they can find us anywhere. And it was precisely through this terrible and painful experience that I had gone through as a child that Gray began to control me through the panic that paralyzed me. It's terrible, because to this day I feel like a dog that has been chipped in order not to lose its owner. I know there are many other chipped people like me, as I met them during some of the abductions in the Oval Room experiment, where they took other children who, like me, were monitored and experimented on with us, but that will be reported in detail shortly. At this moment, when the Gray accessed this experience, my body collapsed, my breath almost failed me, I had an extreme sweat, with the sensation of cold and heat at the same time, but my brain and my mind continued to observe everything. There was a type of equipment which came down from the ceiling, something like a very thin and flexible steel cable, and at the end, something like a luminous needle, which pierced me in the center below my chest. It felt like my abdomen was burning a lot. The Gray, slender and taller than the others, the same one who had stirred that woman's belly, came to my side, leaned over me, and began to stare at me with those big eyes, and again tried to create images in my mind. But this time, images that made me get excited with the memories with that woman who was there in the room. Even trying to control it, it was stronger than my will, and an involuntary erection happened, and another cable came down from the ceiling, which had a kind of luminous canola at the end, a very thin tube, and that was introduced into my urinary channel. Upon entering, I felt a spasm and the process of ejaculation, and at this moment, I know that they collected my semen, and when they removed the canola, I felt my urethra burning. Anger and helplessness gripped me. It felt like they were playing with my feelings, and they kept moving my body. They were reviewing the chip in the left ear, and even with my head still I could see, in my peripheral vision, that they had taken my semen to the left side of the room, where there was a small equipment, and a very thin wire caught a part of the material from the semen, and did some kind of manipulation right there. Then they went towards the woman, and began to move her belly again. I started to try to scream and make a sound, but the Grays didn't pay attention to what I did or felt. Mentally, I tried to talk to that woman, and I saw that tears were coming down in her eyes. I really felt that she was listening to me. I apologized as I couldn't stop it. I mentally spoke to her, to hold on, to try to stay calm, that everything would pass, and that if one day I could have the opportunity, I would like to meet her, and I felt that she understood me because her face changed. The Greys realized that we had somehow maintained mental contact, and 3 of them walked back towards me, while the others continued to mess with that woman. When they arrived at my side, they connected small wires, the thickness of a hair, that came out of the stretcher and entered through my nostrils. The despair increased, because in addition to being panting, they covered my entire face with the same kind of oily gelatin as before, and I thought I would suffocate to death. When these wires entered my head, it burned a lot. It seemed that these thin wires reached the center of my brain, and I felt that they emitted a small vibration and electricity, which went down my spine. That's when at the same moment, I couldn't stand it and passed out. I woke up and it was still dawn. I was totally lost, memory lapse, not remembering my own name. Panic seized me and almost prevented me from breathing and walking. It took my strength, and worst of all, I was naked, alone, in a deforested field to which I couldn't locate where it was. The memories and my references were slowly coming back. I was lying on a trail in the middle of the forest, and I realized that I was in a place close to my house, where we had a water mine that supplied us. Despair took over me again, and the only thing that came to mind was, get home before someone saw me, and something bad could happen to me. I dragged myself to the house and started knocking on the door, and my mother, scared and not understanding anything, opened it and let me inside. I tried to explain more or less what happened to her, but it was in vain. We didn't know how to deal with this situation that had been dragging on for a long time, since childhood. I took my clothes that were on my bed, as if I had gone through the fibers of the fabric, pulled them out and all inside each other, under the covers, as if I had evaporated from the bed. It's hard to explain, as I don't understand either, but it was like that almost every time. There was a strong smell on me, which reminded me of cinnamon, when it's been in the water for a long time and it gives off a sour smell, mixed with ether, I don't know. It was that kind of oily gelatin that was still in my body, and that was evaporating. I immediately went to take a shower to remove that smell, and at that moment, I started to feel pressure in my abdomen, and when I started to urinate, I felt a terrible burning. Blood came out and a little semen mixed, and I could see that in my abdomen there was a mark, as if something had been squeezing me for too long and turning me a little purple. I finished my shower and didn't report anything else to my mother, so I wouldn't make her more worried, because there would be no point in talking. She would only be more desperate and worried, not knowing what to do. Also because at that time, we did not have access to the information we have today about abduction. There was no computer and no internet. My mother was not very educated to understand what was happening to me. The only thing that came to her mind was that I might be going through some kind of spiritual obsession, so she prayed for me. And as we had a more Catholic and spiritualist religious knowledge, she asked her spiritual guides and my guardian angel to help me. But even in the midst of so many prayers, I continued with the abduction sensations. I tried not to think about what had happened, but the memories of that attack came back, the image of that woman, the Greys removing her fetus and placing another creature in her womb, the removal of my semen. It was very difficult to understand why they were doing it. The more I thought about it, the more I felt really weird. I felt like throwing up, a pain in the center of my head, and my eyes burned a lot. I said the prayers I knew then, and tried to calm down. I went back to bed at 3:40 in the morning, and it took me a while to sleep. When I was able to relax, I felt a very strong call. It was different from the other times I projected myself. I was still shaken by everything that had happened hours before, but some energy calmed me down. I felt that something was protecting me, and I soon thought it would be one of my spiritual friends, who used to visit me when I had a bad experience. For a few years, 3 spiritual friends visited me and took care of me. They didn't interfere with my earthly life, but whenever I had a problem, whether physical or emotional, they arrived, without any notice, and gave me advice and directions. They sensed when something wasn't right with me, and these visits happened from time to time, and of course, on this day I really needed help. A slight tingling took over my body, and in a short time, I was projected, watching my physical body lying on the bed. I looked around and I still hadn't seen the presence of my spiritual friends, but I felt a strong and different energy. So I concentrated, as I always do when I go out in the astral body, and I sought to be in touch with the Christ energy, and I made a prayer from the heart with my words. I felt that the whole environment was filled with a light between green and blue, and suddenly, a tall being about 3 meters tall and with a humanoid shape. There were 2 antennae on his skull, like small bumps on his forehead, on his hands, for fingers that were elongated. His hair was almost white and long, to his waist. His eyes were round and big, and he carried a triangular stone, which he used as a key to open dimensional portals. He introduced himself, but as it is difficult to pronounce or write his name, I will address him here as Leon, the sidereal friend. All our communication was by telepathy, and he gave me a lot of information. He told me that he had been watching me for a long time, since the moment I reincarnated on this planet. There were so many existential questions running through my mind, but at that moment I still had memories of that night, and I asked him if he had any information about the woman who had gone through the abduction with me, if she was safe, and what these gray beings wanted. His mental energy was so strong that, at the same time he answered me, he also sent files with a lot of information, which would open later, at the right time. He began to explain that both I and that woman were being monitored for a long time by the Greys, and by a caste of beings that worked in a network, with the intention of manipulating humanity in experiments and genetic manipulations, to make the process of hybridization of their race. What he revealed to me caused me a fear, but his energy managed to calm me. He told me that he would be leaving some files, with important information for me and humanity as a whole, and that this information would open at the right time. To be continued.